I'm Cody Ziegler, the Director of Statewide Policy here at the California Interagency Council on Homelessness. And I have the pleasure of opening our meeting today. Thank you all for your commitment in joining our efforts to end and prevent homelessness in California and for being here today. So a few reminders before we begin. This is a 2-hour meeting. I know we're starting a little bit late, so we're going to try to get through it, but we will we're going to get through all of our agenda items. We'll do our best to keep to the time frame, of course, but there's always a possibility that we may go over that timing slightly. Prior to this meeting, committee members were provided with a briefing packet, which is also available to the public on our website. And we have a couple of good items on the agenda today. So on the next slide, we see the agenda. The first item that we're going to be discussing are the next steps for the recommendations that you all put together for the council on state funding and programs. Then we'll discuss the draft structure and goals for our new action plan. And finally, we'll do an introduction to Cal ICH's role in Housing First implementation and discuss, how we can be the most supportive in achieving the state's vision. So during today's meeting, there will be an opportunity for general public comment at the end of the agenda. We allow for a maximum of 2 minutes for each comment. We welcome all public comments and feedback. However, due to the structure of the public meeting we're in, we may not always be able to respond to them. So for this reason, if you have any specific questions that you would like answered, we ask that you please email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. And with that, the advisory committee to the California Interagency Council on Homelessness is hereby called to order on this day, February 5th, 2024 at 1:10 p.m. So I'll now pass it to Cal ICH staff member Vavila Blossoming Bear to read our tribal land acknowledgement.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Vavila. I'm an individual with lived experience in homelessness. My people are from the Choctaw Nation, and it is my pleasure to serve as the tribal liaison for Cal ICH. We wish to acknowledge that Sacramento is the unceded homeland of the Patwin Wintun, Southern Maidu, Valley and Plains Miwok, the Nisinan people, and members of the Wilton Rancheria who have inhabited this landscape since time immemorial. We extend our gratitude to the ancestors of all California Native American tribes and their descendants, as we recognize that wherever we are joining from in our virtual community, we're all on California Native American land. Thank you, and I'll pass it back to Cody.
Great, thanks so much, Fabiola. I really appreciate that. So I'm now going to pass it to Claire Bannerman to call the roll.
All right. Hi, everyone. This is the attendance roll call for the advisory committee. We need a majority of members or a quorum to officially meet and hold this meeting. Committee members, after I call your name, please say present or here. And apologies if I mispronounce any names. Ludmilla Fade.
Present.
Carolyn Coleman. Oh, sorry. I jumped ahead. My screen jumped. Al Ballesteros.
Present.
Samantha Batko. Doug Bond.
Present.
Carolyn Coleman.
I'm still present.
Thank you. Joe Coletti. Charlene Dimas Peanado.
Present.
Vita Eisen.
Here.
Dora Gallo.
Here, sorry.
It's okay. Jennifer Hark Dietz.
Here.
Eric Harris. Charles Helgett.
Here.
Janet Kelly.
Present.
Thank you. Jody Ketcheside.
Here.
Margot Cushell.
Present.
Philip Mangano. Chris Martin.
Here.
Mariah McGill.
Present.
Luana Murphy. Alisa Orduña,
Present.
Sharon Rapport,
Here.
Janie Roundtree,
Here.
Emilio Salas, Miguel Santana, Doug Shoemaker, Sean Spear,
Present.
Reba Stevens,
Present.
Megan Van Zant, Alex Vitsatsky, Javon Wilkes,
Here.
and Roxanne Wilson.
Present.
Wonderful. Thank you. We have a quorum, and I will move us on to our next agenda item. So it will be the consent calendar. There is not expected to be a discussion, but committee members may choose to have a discussion on any items on the consent calendar. So this is agenda item 2. The consent calendar is for regular, non-controversial items that need to be approved by the committee via vote, where we do not expect discussion from members, but you may choose to do so. We have one item, the adoption of the November 6th committee meeting summary. Are there any comments from committee members? Okay. So I'm going to move us forward to public comment. So before proceeding, since this is an action item that will result in a vote, we will now open up for public comment. Please keep comments to the items on the consent calendar only. If your comment is not related to the consent calendar, there will be time for public comment at the end of this meeting. If you are connected through Zoom, please select the raised hand icon in the meeting window on your computer, and I will unmute you and allow for your comment. If for those joining us by telephone, you may press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment. Once I call on you to speak, you'll be instructed to unmute yourself, and you will have 2 minutes to make your comments. So I will be checking for raised hands. And this is regarding the consent calendar, the meeting summary. We have one raised hand. So Giselle, would you mind popping up a 2-minute timer? Okay, Melanie, I will be allowing you to speak.
Hold on. Oh, hold on a second. Hold on a minute.
Okay, Melanie, can you hear us?
Hi. Yes, this is Luana Murphy trying to get in. We just didn't have any sound.
Oh.
And can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So she's gonna sit down now and take over this meeting. We were just helping.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. All right, we'll go back to the slides, please. Okay, since there are no other public comments, would anyone like to motion to approve the meeting summary?
I move to approve.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion to adopt and a second. I will call the roll for a vote. As your name is called, please say aye or yes. You may also abstain or vote no. Okay, so Ludmilla Fade,
Abstain.
Al Ballesteros,
Aye.
Samantha Backo, Doug Bond, Carolyn Coleman,
Aye.
thank you, Joe Coletti, Charlene Dimas Peanato,
Aye.
thank you, Vitka Eisen,
Abstain.
Right. Dora Gallo.
Aye.
Thank you. Jennifer Hark Dietz.
Aye.
Eric Harris. Charles Helgett.
Aye.
Thank you. Janet Kelly.
Aye.
Wonderful. Jody Ketcheside.
Aye.
Margot Cushell.
Aye.
Thank you. Philip Mangano. Chris Martin.
Aye.
Mariah McGill.
Aye.
Luana Murphy.
Aye.
Alisa Orduña.
Aye.
Sharon Rapport.
Aye.
Janie Roundtree.
Abstain.
Okay. Emilio Salas. Miguel Santana. Doug Shoemaker. Sean Spear.
Aye.
Reba Stevens.
Aye.
Megan Van Sant. Alex Bitsotsky. Javon Wilkes.
Aye.
Thank you. And Roxanne Wilson.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes. The meeting summary is approved, and I will now turn it over to Cody Ziegert to facilitate the next item.
Great, thanks so much. All right. Well, I'm very excited to get to this next item. So if we can move to the next slide, please. Perfect. So we're going to take a moment and just really quickly introduce our new facilitation partner who's on the call today, Malka Kopel, from CSU Sacramento Consensus and Collaboration Program. Malka comes to us with many years of experience in facilitating dynamic cross-sector groups like our own in the field of human services. Many of you may remember Orit Kalman, who was our partner in this work before she started at a new position. So Malka is going to pick up where we left off with Orit and thinking about the most effective ways of engaging you all in our work and ensuring we maintain, an effective connection to the council as a whole. So one thing we're working on with Malka right now is understanding just, how to take this big group with its diversity of experiences, expertise, and opinions, and really utilize your all's time most effectively. To provide succinct, relevant feedback and information that our council members can take action on. So Malka has a lot of experience doing just this, so we're really excited to have her on board. And Malka, I'll just give you a minute to introduce yourself and anything that you might want to say, just so folks get a
Thanks,
chance.
Cody, and hi, everyone. And Cody said everything I was going to say, so I just want to say that I'm very pleased to be here and to help support you all. And if any of you have any thoughts on process, please email the team and we will include that in as we kind of continue in on our thinking. So happy to be here.
Great, thanks so much, Malka. And this is not the last you'll all get to see Malka and interface with her. So just looking forward to having you all, having you back in front of this group as soon as we can. All right, for the sake of keeping going through the agenda, I'm going to move us on to the next item. This will also be somewhat of a quick agenda item. This is a follow-up to our many prior conversations about the recommendations that you all made to the council around effective implementation of state funding and programs related to homelessness. So just as a reminder, in late 2022, council members expressed interest in hearing from the advisory committee on how to best coordinate state funding and programs. At the September 2023 council meeting, Roxanne and Ludmilla provided an initial set of these recommendations to the council. Council members asked various questions about these recommendations. And so based on discussion at our last committee meeting, to answer these questions, Cal ICH staff reached out to members of the committee to provide some more context to the council members' questions. We also sought input from members of the Racial Equity Working Group on some questions related to their work. and received some comments from them. So the responses that we got from you all were really comprehensive and provided a much deeper insight into the recommendations, which we just want to, really appreciate and call out those who participated further in that process. So what we did was CalICH staff created a memo to summarize the responses provided, as well as a list of potential ways that the council can use its resources to move forward the committee's recommendations that are within its purview. So that memo that we sent you that memo in advance of this meeting. We really received minimal feedback, and most of it, or all of it, was focused on sort of like spelling and grammar. And so we feel pretty good about those recommendations and next steps. So the next step for this will be that we will bring this memo to the council for them to vote on whether to approve, the recommended action steps from the memo. And we know we spent a lot of time on these recommendations at this point. So we're trying to streamline this agenda item, which is why we provided the memo in advance of the meeting for you all to take a look at, and as part of our public meeting materials. So as you saw, the memo utilizes the tools and resources available to the council, such as CalICH staff and different teams within CalICH, the working groups, the Lived Experience Advisory Board, and other resources the council has available to move your all's recommendations forward. So you've already had the chance to review the memo and provide feedback. So I'm not really planning to present anything here today, but just wanted to open it up to any questions you all might have about the memo specifically, or about the next steps as this goes to the council. So yeah, just if anyone has questions, feel free to raise your hands. If you feel good about it and you are ready to move on, we can do that as well. So I'll just give folks a minute or two to raise their hands if they have any questions or clarifications. Hi, yeah, Ludmilla, I see your hand.
Yeah, just a kind of a request for clarification on the recommendations. It's got basically two parts, and then there's Appendix A is the second part. And so these are all different kind of things where we want the council to take action, but this is different from a direct recommendation to the action plan. Am I correct about that? It's
Yeah.
So these aren't, even though some of these look like things that could end up in the action plan. There's a little bit of a different process in there. Maybe if you could just speak to that for a moment, that would be great. Because for clarification of what this means.
Totally. Very good question. Thank you, Ludmilla. So it's sort of two parts to answer your question. The first is, so the action steps we proposed was really our attempt as CalICH staff to say, here are the recommendations from the advisory committee. What steps can the council take to really move those forward, right? Using its resources. So a lot of it, as you've seen, like says the working groups will work on, this one, or this, the racial equity working group will put together recommendations on this piece, or the Lived Experience Advisory Board will help us with that piece, right? And so this is just a chance to give really straightforward, sort of actionable steps for the council to take. I think separate but related to that is what goes in the action plan, like you're saying, Ludmilla. All of these things potentially could go in the action plan, right? A lot of these that are within the council's purview could end up in the action plan as either work for advisory committees or work for CalICH staff or whoever is listed sort of in those action steps. We are not in the point of the action plan process where we're listing out all of those actions yet, though. But at that time, we will, you all will be involved in that as well. But we will work to include whatever actions are being taken from your recommendations in the plan as well. Does that make sense? Great. Thanks, Ludmilla. Any other questions? I see a comment, the number of federally recognized tribes be updated to reflect 110. Okay, yes, thank you. We will do that, Mariah. Good recommendation. Thank you. All right. Okay, great. Well, thank you all. We're really excited about this. We will follow up once we've heard from our council members on this, but also please feel free to listen into the council meeting on February 28th, starting at 1 p.m. to hear their discussion. So I'm going to move us to our next agenda item. Great. I keep saying I'm excited about all the agenda items, which is true, but I'm going to stop saying it for fear it will lose its meaning. But I am very happy to talk about the draft structure and goals for our new action plan and bring this to you all. This is something that we've been working pretty hard on within Cali CH, and excited to get to show you sort of the first pieces of it. So this conversation is going to be about our new action plan that we're putting together. You all have heard a fair amount about our goals for this plan already and have gotten to provide some feedback on, high level aspects of it. But now we're slowly getting, as we said, more granular over time, and are going to present sort of on the draft structure and goals that we have put together for the new plan. So I'll start by giving a brief overview of sort of just how we're thinking of structuring the plan. But our conversation today is really going to focus on the goals that we're hoping to include in the plan. As you might remember, we've previously talked about possible ways the state that we can measure the state's progress on preventing and ending homelessness. So we wanted to go back to that conversation, but really specifically through the lens of the action plan. And Sydney Bennett, Cali CH's Director of Research, is here as well to provide an overview of the data that we currently track, and then talk about the draft goals we've created for inclusion in this plan. So also, just as a note, we're going to speak to the council about this at their upcoming meeting. So we're really interested in getting your all's feedback and input now so that we can include it in that discussion with the council. But before passing it to Sydney, I'm just going to go through a bit of information about the structure of the new plan that we are proposing. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Oh, and the next one, actually. Perfect. I'm going to say this quickly because you have heard this plenty from me now, but as a very fast reminder, you all know our current action plan collects activities that our council member departments and agencies are currently doing to prevent and end homelessness. It covers work from fiscal year 2021 through this fiscal year, so the end of June, and is based on a vision of making homelessness in California rare, brief, and one time. In its current form, the plan acts as a comprehensive list of state actions toward this vision. However, with the new iteration of the plan, as we've talked about, right, council members have really asked us to help them find ways to make the document more strategic, setting directional goals, and helping them conceive of sort of new actions they can take towards those goals. So what follows is how we are currently thinking about structuring the plan so that it achieves the vision that council members are asking for. So on the next slide, I'm going to outline just the strategic framework we have drafted. I know this is not the prettiest visual, we will get there, but I just want to share a little bit about, how we're working together to get us toward our vision of preventing and ending homelessness. So I'm going to cover these council tools and actions pieces of the strategic framework, and then I'll pass it to Sydney to discuss the performance measurement more in depth. So at a high level, our vision, as we know, is to support local, state, and federal systems that lead to homelessness being rare, brief, and one time, all while advancing progress toward equity in those pursuits. In short, we want to see a California in which no one has to experience homelessness for an extended period of time, and where we're able to address homelessness as quickly as it arises. We believe each of our state departments and agencies have specific tools they can use to get us to that vision, right? So I'll go over those in a moment, but we really want to organize the plan by these tools so that council members can more easily see themselves in the plan and understand where their work overlaps or could be coordinated. Each of these tools may also be associated with frameworks for understanding how to achieve racial equity in the work. And then within each of these tools is the actions that council member departments and agencies will take. These actions are like the activities in our current plan, but will include both state level actions, as well as those that can specifically support local communities. These actions will be associated with performance measures that tie directly to the goals that we've set out in the plan over the next few months. Over the next few months, we'll be working with council member departments and agency partners to identify the highest priority actions to include in the plan, ones that will push us most towards this vision. So last, just briefly, we believe all of our actions will have direct impact on our goals, and Cali CH staff will really be undergoing regular performance measurement in order to understand our progress towards the goals. So we'll use this information to understand the success of our plan and its construction. For example, if we're successfully implementing all of our actions and not seeing progress towards our goals, that'll be an indicator to us that we need to go back and look at the actions, look at the tools, right? Or look at the measures and understand what needs to be revised, what needs to be strengthened in order to achieve our vision. So I'm going to move on to discussing the tools that we will use to organize the new plan. Similar to our current action areas, we've identified 5 tools that we think encompass most of the work that the state departments and agencies have at their disposal when it comes to preventing and ending homelessness. These include increasing the supply of housing and services, coordinating and streamlining state programs, engaging partners and communities, using data strategically, and advancing best practices and quality. So these are the categories of work we see the state able to make the biggest impact in, and therefore are using them to sort of organize all of the actions that we want to take, because we think it'll allow our council members to sort of see themselves more easily in the plan and where there's overlap between their work, right? After this meeting, we're actually so we're not gonna focus on these during this meeting, but after this meeting, we're gonna offer committee members a chance to weigh in on sort of these tools and the highest priority actions within each of these tools. We don't have time to take on that discussion today during this meeting, but we do have time as we go through this process to get your input. So just keep an eye out for that. We will also discuss this at a future committee meeting. So just wanted to introduce this sort of high level structure that we are looking at. And then, as I mentioned, for each tool category, we'll also identify equity-focused frameworks or principles to guide and assess our implementation of the actions that we're taking. So within each of these tools, we'll also work with council departments and agencies to identify state-level actions, as well as actions to support our local partners. And each of these actions will also have like key indicators or performance measures for each action, right, that are connected to the plan's goals, so we can see how each action is really moving us towards our goals. And then very quickly on the next slide, you'll see a preview of some of the equity frameworks that we're looking at in relationship to each tool listed in the plan. I'm not going to go over these now because we're still in the process of identifying the appropriate ways to really fully embed equity into the plan. But if you have thoughts on this, feel free to follow up with us. We will bring this to a future meeting with you all as well. But just like a call out here that, right, we understand that equity when it comes to using data strategically is different from understanding equity when it comes to engaging our partners or local communities, right? So we're trying to be really intentional about how we use these equity frameworks to really push the implementation of the plan. And then last, before we pass it over to Sydney, I'll just say that we are hoping all of this work will connect to sort of 4 to 5 high-level goals that the plan will strive to achieve through the actions listed. We also may have a set of key performance measures or key indicators, as we'll call them, that will supplement these goals to give a broader picture of homelessness at the state level. So I'll let Sydney talk more about that. But before I take too much time, I will pass it to Sydney to dive deeper into the goals of the plan, which will provide the basis for our discussion soon.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sydney Bennett. I'm the Director of Research here at Cal ICH, and I'm excited to be here with you all today. As Cody mentioned, we'll be discussing some options for goals for the action plan that our staff has identified. So I'll start by sharing how these goals we're discussing fit into the broader work of the action plan, and then we'll walk through some potential goals and some measures previously identified by the advisory committee. The current action plan does not have explicit directional goals. We do have a series of performance measures that are based on the California System Performance Measures, which I'll discuss in detail in a few minutes. For the new action plan, we're proposing using the California System Performance Measures and potentially other data sources as well to create a set of directional goals that will measure our collective progress towards preventing and ending homelessness in California. We've identified a few criteria for these goals in the action plan to ensure they support our work. These goals should represent core outcomes that the homelessness response system must accomplish to prevent and end homelessness in California. This means to make progress towards these goals, we should be moving closer to preventing and ending homelessness. The goals should be ones that focus the council's attention and activities in the action plan on actions that the state can take to prevent and end homelessness. These goals should also be ones that are understandable to a public audience and resonate and help the public understand the key work of the state and our local partners. The goals should also be ones, of course, that we can measure consistently and effectively over time, meaning that we have access to the data and that there's a way to actually measure progress towards the goals. Next slide. So we started by looking at our California system performance measures, which are a series of metrics that help the state and local jurisdictions assess their progress towards preventing, reducing, and ending homelessness. And we identified 4 of the system performance measures that we believe fit well with the criteria I just shared. So before explaining kind of each of the goals we identified in more detail, I want to just provide a very high-level overview of the California system performance measures. These measures are statutorily required measures that track system-wide performance at the state and local level towards our shared mission of preventing and ending homelessness. The measures focus on improving outcomes for people experiencing homelessness while accessing services, and they all measure progress system-wide, so across all projects and service types, rather than at the level of a specific program. In a minute, I'll go through each of the 4 measures you see on the slide: exits to permanent housing, length of time homeless, returns to homelessness, and successful placements from street outreach. But for overall context, these measures are generated using data from Cal ICH's statewide homelessness database, known as the Homeless Data Integration System, or HDIS for short. HDIS is an aggregation of data from COC's Homelessness Management Information Systems, or HMIS, and they collect data about the people who are accessing services in that COC through a range of programs, including prevention, street outreach, and temporary and permanent housing. Please note, HDIS data does not include everyone who is accessing services. Entering data into HMIS is required for many federal and state funding programs, but optional for independent providers. The data also does not include data from victim service providers who are prohibited from using HMIS. And then additionally, we know that the HMIS and therefore HDIS data does not generally include data on people receiving homelessness services from California's federally recognized tribes, as our tribal partners generally don't use HMIS. The data for each of the measures I'll walk through next is available both statewide and at the local, the COC level, and that's available both for the entire population as well as by race and ethnicity, gender, household composition, and for other subpopulations such as unaccompanied youth and veterans. So when we're talking about the measures, we're talking about both for the population as a whole and also disaggregated for these subpopulations. For the sake of time, I'm going to run through the goals quickly and not get into the methodology weeds of how these things are calculated, but my team would be happy to provide follow-up materials if you want more detailed information about these measures. The first potential goal that we identified is the number of people exiting homelessness into permanent housing. This goal is a measure of the people whose experience of homelessness has now ended. The measure includes anyone who has experienced homelessness while accessing services and exited to permanent housing, either within or outside of the homelessness response system. And I'm just going to keep walking through them, but we can show the slides if needed for context again later. So the second goal we have is reducing the length of time people remain homeless, which is supporting our vision of homelessness being brief when it does occur. So this measure tracks the length of time someone is experiencing homelessness while accessing services. This measure does not capture the full duration of homelessness if a person didn't access services throughout their whole episode of homelessness, which we know is very common based on other research, such as the California statewide study of people experiencing homelessness that Dr. Kuchel presented to the council about in the fall. So that's the first goal is people exiting homelessness into permanent housing. The second potential goal is around the length of time someone is homeless. The third potential goal looks at returns to homelessness. So building off the goal, of course, we want to ensure we are increasing exits to permanent housing, but we also want to measure and ensure that those exits are indeed permanent. So measuring whether homelessness response systems are successfully reducing the number of people returning to homelessness after exiting to permanent housing. To effectively end homelessness, as I said, it's important to ensure placements truly are long-term. This measure looks at returns within 6 months of an exit to permanent housing, and that's based on whether someone has then accessed services again. And then the last of the goals is increasing successful placements from street outreach. So that goal measures whether someone experiencing homelessness who is engaged through street outreach programs moves into temporary or permanent housing. And while ending homelessness, of course, necessitates moves into permanent housing, we see this as a potential leading indicator in that someone moving from an unsheltered living situation into shelter can be a crucial step for people to be connected with permanent housing and other services. So these are 4 potential goals. In a minute, we're going to ask for your feedback on these goals, as well as ideas for other goals we could be looking at for the action plan. But before that, I'll pass it off to my colleague Cody to share some of the measures that were previously identified by the advisory committee before we open it up for discussion.
Great, thank you, Sydney. Appreciate that. And I know we were playing some slide bingo just during that, so we have all 4 of those goals listed on one of the next slides. So don't worry about that. So yeah, thank you for that. Just wanted to go back to what we were talking about related to the conversation we had before, right? Which is we asked you all about potential measures that we could use to understand the collective progress the state was making on, preventing and ending homelessness. And so we took the ideas that you all had and created a list of, possible key indicators for us to consider as we work through this process. While we don't need to decide these indicators now, we did want to remind you all that, you've suggested potential things for us to measure in these areas, such as population health, housing and services, access, institutional involvement, and equity, among others. So these are separate from the sort of high level goals like Sydney mentioned, because those are really like 4 to 5 high level directional goals. We know we want them to be somewhat limited in scope so that we can not get too distracted as to having a ton of different goals. But these key indicators, right, will help supplement those goals as saying, these aren't necessarily directional, but these are things we want to understand if we are going to understand the state of homelessness in California. So we haven't yet reviewed all of these, right, for accessibility of data and feasibility of analysis and whatnot, but just want to say that there is, aside from those high level goals, there is a place for us to consider other measurements like the ones that you all have mentioned before to us. So if you have any ideas about these and where we can access this data and whatnot, love to hear those as well. So I'm going to move to the discussion now. And we just really want to talk about our specific proposed goals, right? They're here on the right side of the screen. Increase the number of people exiting to permanent housing, reduce the length of time people remain homeless, reduce the number of people returning to homelessness after exiting into permanent housing, and increase successful placements from street outreach. So as Sydney mentioned, just as a reminder, right, our criteria for selecting these goals were that they represent core outcomes that the homelessness response system must be able to accomplish to prevent and end homelessness. They focus the council on actions that can drive progress. They help the public understand key work, and we have the ability to consistently and effectively measure them over time. So while we know these 4 goals don't necessarily cover the whole, every single aspect of homelessness, right? We'd like to understand. We also know that it's important to have, as I said, a few high-level directional goals to keep us moving in the right direction. So our first question is, do these 4 goals effectively capture the state's efforts to make progress on preventing and ending homelessness, right? Related to that, what's missing from these? What data sources could be used? We know we're missing goals related to health-related outcome metrics, related to system coordination and performance, related to prevention, and plenty of other things. I think the question is, right, do we add another sort of high-level goal on any of those? Do they become sort of key indicators that we track? And what data sources do we have to continually monitor those things? And then last, just really, briefly here, like, should any of the prior suggestions from this committee become on possible key indicators be translated into sort of higher level directional goals? So I know that's a lot of talking that we just did, but really interested in your all's thoughts around this. This is the first we're sharing this information with you all. So just want to start there. Does anyone have questions or thoughts? And we will post the questions in the chat as well. And then I'll sort of pull down the slides just so that we can all see each other as we're talking. I see Sharon, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you all. I really like these goals. I think they're, consistent with HUD goals and consistent with what most, I think, COCs are working toward. I would recommend adding goal around equity, just around decreasing the disproportionate impact of homelessness on people, who are Black or Indigenous populations. So I think that's important to add in and to have goals around, I know you're still looking at equity considerations, but that seems really critical. And I'm not sure if this is what you meant, Cody, when you were talking about, like more directional goals. But I do think it's important to like have specific goals that are, that the state is trying to reach, like increase the number of people exiting into permanent housing by, a certain percentage, so that there are specifics around it that you're trying to get to. So that seems really important. I know these are, like typical systems goals, but it does seem like for the state to really be measuring its progress, we need to have numbers or percentages around them. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sharon. And I just realized I'm still sharing, so let me stop so we can all see each other. Great. Okay, I see Charlene, you have your hand up.
Yes, hi, thank you. So excellent work on all of this information provided. I have a question. I'm not sure if this is the time to bring this up, but you mentioned children and subpopulations, but I want to make sure that we are identifying the transition age youth population. Many of these are young people aging out of the foster care system that participate in the THP Plus program, interim housing, and then also go into permanent supportive housing. As you know, it's a very vulnerable population, and they're oftentimes grouped into adult homelessness, and their needs are very different, unique, and need very specialized services. And then also, it could be a good opportunity to also address the high student homeless population that we have. These are also young people attending community colleges, state colleges that are also very much at risk for homelessness. So again, I'm not sure where we can drop this information and if this is the area where we also need to measure impact, but just I want to make sure that we are intentional about this very vulnerable stage of development. As you know, it's also a critical time when if they're going to experience a more severe mental illness or substance abuse issues, where we're dealing with co-occurring disorders, this is when it happens. This is when it's manifesting itself. Thank you.
Yeah, and we do look at unaccompanied transition age youth as one of the subpopulations, and I think we also look at parenting youth separately, but we could send around after the meeting the list of kind of subpopulations that we have now. It's not, as long as the populations can be identified with data that's collected in HMIS, once we settle on the goals, we can certainly add populations, have more specific populations, for the point about racial equity. We do look by race and ethnicity, but we'll be thinking that through again with some changes HUD has made to the data standards. So for every goal that we select, our intention is to also look at that for specific subpopulations as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
you. Jennifer?
Thanks all. Thanks for your work on this. I wanted to echo what Sharon said about being as specific as possible so that we can really judge our progress as a state. I think that will also help leverage cities, counties, right, our other municipalities to try to hit those goals. And then the second thing is the fourth goal that you have around increasing placements from street outreach. While I agree, I think some contracts are not set up for that to be successful. So for example, we have a couple contracts where the city determines where we go. And so we're not building that long-term relationship, right, that helps folks get connected to the system. So I think I just want to be thoughtful there because there sometimes is a misalignment that outreach, and I do think outreach can lead to direct housing placement, but I think your contract has to be really structured that way. So some electeds may not recognize those nuances if they're not in the implementation day to day.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that, Jennifer. And I know that Sydney and her team have been thinking a lot about how do we measure those goals, right? And like the details of what goes into those measures. And so we're definitely working on that, but appreciate that point. Margaret?
Thanks. Thought it looks great overall. Just a couple of thoughts. One is I do think that there's a lot of the health data, particularly with CalAIM becoming so important. I would love to see there as a goal or a sub goal, some sense of how we are doing leveraging that important new resource, which could be done with data mergers. I think it's going to be a key indicator. Second is permanent housing can mean a lot of things. And I would love to see if there's any way to break that down. Is that permanent housing as in moved in with a family member or moved in on their own without any rental assistance and coded that way versus moved in with the system's support? I think it's going to be a lot easier to judge things like returns to homelessness because it will be important to know whether people are being evicted from PSH would allow us to get a sense of if the PSH is appropriately staffed, et cetera, versus people going into places with no rental assistance or anything where we know they're at extraordinary risk. And the third thing I think is perhaps similar to what Jennifer was pointing out is that, we found in CASPA that so many people who are unsheltered have so little contact with any, organized help because they're so isolated and organizations are understaffed. And it seems like a high threshold to only look at whether they got a placement, but frankly, some measure of accountability for actual contacts or anything would be, I think, just useful to keep as a secondary measure to keep an eye on. Thanks so much.
Yeah, that's something we really struggle with in the data is only seeing the people who are interacting in some way with the service sector. So very much welcome ideas for other data sets or data mergers that we should be looking at. On the permanent housing side, we are looking both at placements into programs that are in HMIS as well as moving in with friends or family or so forth. But we could certainly, we have the data to kind of disaggregate that. It's somewhat self-reported unless we're seeing a move into another project in HMIS. And that's come up in our conversations as well to disaggregate returns as we know moving in with a friend or a family is not nearly as much of a stable living situation as having, a voucher or PSH within the system.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Roxanne?
Hello. So when I was in my previous life, I was digging deep into transition age youth homelessness for all of the reasons that was mentioned here today. But since I moved over to the county, one of the concerns that is growing quite rapidly for me is actually the aging adult population. So anything that we can do to really dig deep into that, I think that we need to consider what are like the age ranges that we consider aging adults, because as we all know, people who are unsheltered, their body ages much faster than someone who has been sheltered their entire life. So that's just one thing for us to really take into consideration. And the second thing is I love HMIS data. So the good thing is that the state could require that HMIS vendors create a special assessment that digs a little bit deeper and collects data differently than what HUD collects. The issue when it comes to outreach, our community has like a 99% HMIS data quality threshold, which we're very proud of. But what that means is that we're not collecting everything in HMIS because outreach workers have to collect enough data to meet the continuum of care's like threshold for HMIS. So if we were to create a specific group that just focuses on HMIS, I'd be happy to serve on that team.
And I maybe should have mentioned specifically hearing youth come up a few times that Cal ICH is actually working on a separate project. I'll just plug around setting data and goals for unaccompanied youth, unaccompanied women experiencing homelessness, and survivors of domestic violence. So I can send out my contact after this, but if there's any folks who are interested in engaging specifically in conversations around data and outcomes measures for any of those three populations, separate, but I think still aligned with our work on the action plan, we can connect separately.
Yeah, great. And I'll just say that my dream for this is that our data doesn't just live in PDF form, right? But that we can somehow put it on our website so that we can do that disaggregation live, right? Like you can click on the data, you can see, you know, different populations of interest, etc. So no promises on that because that is a whole other set of work, but that is sort of our ideal, right? Is that we can see youth and young adults, we can see older adults, we can understand the data in many different ways. So that hopefully no one gets mad at me for now saying that out loud. No, just kidding. Sam, as your hand.
Thanks. So I had two thoughts. One was that I think that a goal around prevention is really essential. I think we saw from the national data, and also I know that the jurisdictions that I'm working on in the state of California are housing more people than they ever have on like a annual, monthly basis. But the number of people entering homelessness is exceeding the number of people exiting. I also think that adding something around reducing entries to homelessness or preventing homelessness, which can be tricky to measure, but pushes more to the interagency nature. It like starts to talk about other programs outside of the homelessness response system being responsible for helping to keep people housed, and really starts to look at some of the other agencies that need to have universal screeners or use emergency resources that they have in order to keep people in their homes. So I think that's really important. And I think that that's also particularly applicable to two populations that we've spoken about today, which is the aging population and young people in particular. And then the second thing that I wanted to highlight was, and I don't think this needs to be one of the 4 primary goals or 5 primary goals as I've suggested, but one of the biggest things that we picked up in our women's needs assessment in Los Angeles was that the primary barrier to shelter for women was concerns about safety in shelter. And so I think that thinking about how to make sure that we're capturing people's like physical safety and ability to move through these programs is going to be really important to understanding where we're having issues getting people through the system and into housing.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Sam. And we definitely are interested in measuring prevention, like you said. I know the council is interested in that as well. And so if you have any thoughts about the best ways to do that, we're happy to set up a separate conversation about that, just to really think that through, because that is definitely one of the areas that we've heard a lot about and we know is really important, especially in bringing in those other sectors like you mentioned. So definitely happy to have a conversation to sort of go through the details of how that might happen.
And I hear this coming up a couple times and also see it in the chat. But one challenge in using services data is that we can't measure, right, if that's an increase in homelessness or first-time homelessness, because we can't tell if someone's accessing services for the first time, which is a good thing, right? Like they're connecting to the system versus they're falling into homelessness for the first time, which is a bad thing. So this is something you know, when we were picking our goals, we kind of left off because we didn't feel like we had an accurate way to measure that fluctuation, especially as we're with this action plan, we're looking at more state programs and actions to support our local systems, that it could just be, you know, better reach of the homelessness response system. So welcome any ideas folks here have about, you know, how we could measure first-time homelessness or increases in homelessness generally. But we didn't want a world where COCs provide more services and then we say we're doing worse at preventing and ending homelessness when we're not.
Yeah, thank you, Sydney. Ludmilla, I see your hand.
Hello. So I very much respect all the work that is being done. You know, there are none of the goals that I disagree with. And also I do am aware that on collecting the data and statusizing that on outcomes, that there are currently limitations to the data that's currently being collected, you know, through the HJS system, etc. However, I gotta say, it's a worthy goal to be getting people into permanent supported housing. You're looking at goal number 1 there. But what about all the people who there isn't a house for, or who can't afford a house? Especially in light of you know, Boise versus Martin being up against the up for review with the Supreme Court level, and you know, and then the political climate being somewhat uncertain, you know, going forward, you know, with various elections and stuff down the road too. Also, so what about all those people who aren't able to by the necessary set of processes and miracles get into a permanent supported housing? And it includes people who prefer not to be fully dependent on a system either, would prefer to have a lighter level of assistance, you know, to get help and to not be just on the street. As a goal in ending homelessness, I think we need to look at the, you know, the 80+% of people who are considered to be homeless who can't get into permanent supported housing at this time, and what is happening with those people, and having those people be kind of up in the air, being traumatized by their, you know, by society and by increasing regulations. You can't park here, you can't go there, you can't put your RV here, you can't put your tent there, and their own sense of inadequacy. That's a real problem. You know, that especially when people with a housing costs such as they are, there are more people who are finding it difficult to just move to another house and move into something. Okay. There also is a large number of people who are in transition for education or for looking for jobs, you know, or need to move from one place to another. So wherever they are, that they're homeless may not be the place that they really want to end up being. So some kind of sane kind of system, some kind of, I would call it viable housing that's comparable to their life situation, you know, where it's not really a temporary situation, but it's not something where they're moving directly into a brick and mortar house. I do want to say, particularly for education, it's concerning to me that there isn't a system for helping with housing for people who are homeless, who want to attend school, who want to go back to college, even though that's obviously a temporary situation. They don't need to move into a permanent house right next to the college. Okay. But some kind of help for those people who desire that would be really helpful, because there are people getting kicked around out there in the street, sometimes for I know some people for a couple of years have been kicked around, that had wanted to sign up for college, but hadn't been able to find a place to land. There's so some way of capturing, I think, people's connection with community and services, up in the education, behavioral health thing. I want to say homelessness to me is not just about having a house, a brick and mortar house. Being not homeless is about connected with community and of of increasing my skills, decreasing trauma, and improving possibilities and connections. So some way of tracking those connections with other services, wraparound services, yes, but for those people who don't need that top-down type of managed care, connecting services that will allow us to become part of the community, increase our income, et cetera, is really valuable. And I do want to say that there is, okay, I'm gonna take a breath. As far as reporting, one of the things that's actually really difficult, one of the end results is that people are housed, they're happy, they're connected, they're doing well. There are people who have run into difficulties with the systems, or they've run into difficulties with or they have suggestions. If there was some kind of central reporting thing, this wouldn't be a consistent data stream, but it would be an interesting thing where people could say if they're running into trouble with the systems in their area, or if they have suggestions of something they would need. If they were just a repository for the public where you could put in stuff, I'm going to say that there's very broken grievance type systems, very broken and almost non-existent input systems for those of us who are homeless to be able to say something. It's basically not safe to say something because you're viewed as a troublemaker, or you have fear about, and so you can't really report it directly to an agency, but then there isn't really a county agency. I'm not entirely comfortable with it having to go entirely up to the state for every kind of thing, but it would just seem to have some kind of value to be able to say, hey, we're in this village situation. There's like 20 people here. They've got some services for us so that we can connect. This is working. This is great. This is a good model. I want you guys to know about this. Or that somebody can say, hey, look, there's a bunch of people here that really shouldn't be in this work, and they keep pushing us around. It would, I'm not quite sure how the communication would, but some kind of a place you could say something, kind of like a grievance line, but bigger. Anyways, I see a bazillion hands out there. Thank you for listening to me. It's a bit scattered. Those are some of my thoughts. I hope that some of those are helpful.
No, I appreciate it, Ludmilla. And I'll just say that obviously there was a lot in what you just said, so we might come back to you just to make sure we understood all of it correctly. But I will say part of our work, at least with our council member departments and agencies, is to understand the needs of their specific populations, right? So like you said, we work with Department of Education and community colleges, right, to understand like the student housing issue that you were mentioning as well. And so we are thinking about, those specific needs of those specific populations. I'll let Sydney add to anything that she heard, but otherwise we will come back to you and talk more.
Yeah, I think that I was thinking a lot about the point you made about permanent housing, because we can, see whether someone's exiting to permanent supportive housing or maybe with friends or living on their own. But we don't have a good way to measure if that was the housing they were looking for or what they wanted, when they were seeking housing. So that's definitely something interesting to think about, how we can measure if that, like, we're looking at permanent housing, right, as an end goal, but whether that was in the desired place, with who they hope to live for, that kind of thing, would be really valuable extension of that goal. And then we do also think a lot and struggle with, how are we looking at data around people who are never ending up placed in permanent housing. So I think the length of time homeless is trying to measure that, like how long is someone waiting for permanent housing, but we don't have full data there, right? We're only seeing when someone's accessing services. So that's definitely been a challenge we've been thinking about as well, and is helpful to bring to light.
Okay, I see a couple more hands up, so I'll call on those folks before we finish our discussion. So Chuck?
Thank you. Cody, this is, I think, a question for you. I saw a supportive slide that talked about access to housing and services. And I'm curious about how you're defining services. Is it the housing services, or are we talking about the broader spectrum of full spectrum of supportive services? Because from our perspective, the importance of supportive services in keeping people in housing is very significant. And I'm not seeing anything here quite connected directly to the access to supportive services. And I think that connection is important in keeping people in housing and treat the homeless situation. So a suggestion there maybe that it more quickly identified as supportive services.
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. I appreciate the question too. I think we are taking services broadly defined, I would say, as we'll talk about in our next agenda item, actually, around what Housing First looks like, right? We understand that Housing First is not housing only, it is also all the services that go into housing to support folks. And so I'm not necessarily, I don't think we think of services as only one thing, right? But sort of the continuum of care that people need, or the continuum of services people need in order to stay in their housing and be successful in all different types of environments. And I think a lot of the work of our council member departments and agencies will fall into that, right, services bucket, because not everyone is providing direct housing exactly, but we know that the work DSS does to get people benefits, and the work that CalVet does, right, to support veterans, and the work that Department of Education does to support students, like all of those services make up our homelessness response system. And so I think that's how we're thinking about it. I don't know if that's helpful clarification or not. Great. Okay, Luana. Oh, you're.
I can find my unmute button. I'll keep my comments brief, and they may actually be more relevant to the next subject, but we were talking about data collection. I have some concerns. I am very much in favor of Proposition 1, which is about to pass, which is going to move more housing out of MHSA, money out of MHSA and into housing. Great. In our anecdotal experience and in the recent studies that I have been reading regarding Housing First, yes, it's a great idea, but when it's housing first and services never, it doesn't work well. And so I am a little worried about how we're going to provide the services into this new permanent supportive housing. How are we going to do the supportive piece? And I am wondering if maybe we should be looking at collecting data about, I'm sure we're going to be collecting data about how many people fall out of permanent supportive housing. The why of that, I think, is important. And in my anecdotal experience, and I think in the last speaker's anecdotal experience, it's usually because there are no services provided to this person who really, yes, the Housing First is great, but we have to have that supportive service. And ECM is I think, an avenue that we should really be exploring, because I think it fits into the new paradigm of shifting money into housing without any services money to go with it. Maybe there's a data point we should be collecting about how many of the people that we are getting into supportive housing fall out of supportive housing. And of those who fell out, were they primarily the ones that didn't have any support going on? Because unfortunately, there's a lot of that. A lot more than we'd like to talk about or admit to. And I know that's an unpopular thing, but I live in the real world. So anyway, thank you for that. As I said, that might be more appropriate to the next conversation, but I'm feeling pretty strongly about this, and we need to take a look at it. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you for your comment and for feeling strongly. We welcome feeling strongly in this environment. We are going to be talking about this a little bit more. I will just say, definitely hear you on, you can't really say housing and services and then not actually have the appropriate services necessary for folks, right? And I think that is an ongoing discussion about what services are appropriate for which populations and how do we ensure folks have access to those services. So would love your thoughts in the next conversation about that as well, if you have any additional, and definitely hear you on sort of the outcomes from permanent housing. I think that's something we've been thinking about and trying to understand, how do we keep track of those as well. So yeah, thanks for your comment. All right, Reba.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Black History Month. I want to thank, there was someone who talked about percentages, and I think that is good. The other is around collecting data. I think that I just want to remind us that it's raining across California. Is it raining where you are? Not a bit. Yeah, it's raining, it's wet. There are a host of folk who are outside still struggling. And then for some, there's just not either enough shelter for them or the shelters are just not adequate for folks to desire to want to go in. And so I just want to remind us of what time it is because I'm hearing the rain. And I am reminded of what that's the outside with nowhere to go. Sick and suffering and how it exacerbates my mental and emotional. But with all that being said, I also want to remind us that community resources differ across California. So it's not a one size fit all thing here. I do want to also say that, you know, while I think the goals are great, I'm questioning how these goals and meeting these goals on the ground level could actually happen. And I didn't hear anything about funding. So how is this going to be funding? Where is this money coming from in order to do so? I also want to remind us that no matter what we do, if we are not educating folk across broadly to know what to do so that you can perhaps prevent falling, right? Because there are sometimes problem-solving dollars. There's dollars that are sometimes associated to preventing one. But oftentimes people end up hitting the ground before they're even aware that there was an opportunity for them to be caught. So where is that safety net? Where's the goal around safety measures or providing that? There was nothing I heard anything around substance use disorder. Right now in California, we know across our state that fentanyl is killing people, that the drugs of yesterday are the drugs of today are not the drugs of yesterday. Or dying. And then there is the harm reduction that not sure about what it does when we think about housing first and services. And I know we're not on that subject yet, but it just brings to mind that there's oftentimes, in my opinion, a disconnect. So we are, you know, also finding people with paraphernalia, but how much are we addressing and trying to get folks to be aware of other options such as treatment and our anonymous fellowship programs. So there's a lot of data here in Los Angeles County that we can find around those groups, particularly around Black people experiencing homelessness through ARDI, the Anti-Racist Diversity and Inclusion Department, the CEO's office. And I'm going to go back to what I believe is missing in these goals is true advertising. How are we messaging? Who are we messaging to in order for, you know, folks to really know? So I'm not sure how we're including what's happening on the ground level. And I'm repeating myself for a reason. I want you all to know that I know that I'm repeating because I want to make sure it sticks somewhere that we keep doing things too high. You know, we're missing what's happening at the bottom. And then the other was around workforce. You know, how are we addressing and where's the goals for our workforce to ensure that they're not being burnt out? What is the ratio, you know, when for those in whom they are caring for, and how can you provide real adequate and appropriate services and support to someone when you're overloaded yourself? And then the last thing I'll say is around those who are doing this work and who are experiencing housing insecurity themselves. And I feel like that should be a goal there for the workforce. And I'm gonna pin it there, but I do want you to see that I had a whole lot, a whole lot here to say. We can't do this thing for free. We need some funding. in order to do it. And so I'm hoping that we will also bring that to us as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Reba. And I just want to thank you for reminding us about the weather outside. I know that discussions about like plans and goals and strategy, it can get really high level and feel hard because what we really know it's about is actual living people. So I just really appreciate the reminder and keeping us grounded in what our real goals are, right?
I'm sorry, Cody, I just wanted to add one last piece, and that
Please.
is around mortality. You know, how many people are dying? Who's dying? How often are they dying? And why isn't that information talked about on a regular basis? You know, we talk about how many people are falling into becoming unhoused, but we don't talk enough about how many people are dying while unhoused, as well as in our temporary shelters as a result of substance. I'm done.
Thank you, Reba. And Vika, thank you so much for your patience. You win the award for today for sitting with your hand up for so long, but yeah, would love for you to have the last comment.
Thank you. That's okay. I think I deserve going last because I spent about 20 minutes futzing around with my technology. So I deserve last place. Similar to the prior two speakers, Reba and Luana, when I look at the goal around who is exiting permanent housing and returning to homelessness, I want, who is that? Like, what is that? Like, what is the demographic there? What are the contributing factors? And is it like, who are those folks? And what does it, if anything, have to do with a substance use disorder or mental illness? And so it'd be really helpful to know that, because you kind of factor a policy fix, if you will, based on what you're seeing. Reba, I think you probably were alluding to this, but who is dying from overdoses is disproportionately Black African-American men. So I think that's where definitely the concern is around, around drug use and people dying of overdoses. I want to be mindful about one of the things that Prop 1 is supporting. Sorry, it's going to tie back into this group, but there is a bunch of, if it passes, it's a bunch of money for building what is talked about as housing, but it's likely to be more secure psychiatric settings. And so if we consider secure psychiatric settings, I'm troubled by the idea that secure psychiatric settings becomes the housing option of choice for people experiencing mental illness, as well as people experiencing substance use disorder. And certainly recently passed Senate Bill 43 would indicate that that is the option we want to have considered for people with substance use disorder and mental illness. And so I just urge us as an advisory group to really push back against this seeming desire to coerce people into care instead of creatively thinking. And don't get me wrong, I do think we need an expansion of intensive services for people with serious and persistent mental illness, that there is a lack of capacity. I just question whether we have very narrow thinking and focus of, if what we're doing today doesn't work, well, let's lock people up somehow. And so what we're calling housing is really just some kind of a locked something or other, instead of like putting all of that aside and let's think creatively and figure out innovative ways of responding to people who are struggling. And I will end with one example that I can think of. And there was a piece in the San Francisco Chronicle about a woman who is experiencing homelessness. She's in a tent and she uses drugs. She has been in and out of the hospital. She has a lot of complicating medical issues. And she's been in ICU, and the article talked about it is that she may well die given her complexity. And it ends with her back in the tent. And I think, well, what if, like, the answer seemed to be, for some people, she needs to be locked up somewhere. And I think, but what if we gave her everything she wanted and needed in housing? Like, what if she could be in housing that was safe and a person she had like intensive in-home services because she has some significant mental issues, and that she could have, and her boyfriend could stay there, and her dog, and she could use drugs there because she's a person who uses drugs. And so and we would prevent overdoses. And so I think if you think about it creatively, if the goal is to keep people from getting thicker, from dying, and from being out on the street, then we have to do things differently than what we've done before. So I just urge this group, because this is a group of people who can bounce around a lot of good ideas, to not limit ourselves to thinking it's either lock up or don't lock up. There are many other options. Finally, I'll say that in San Francisco had the worst year ever for deaths by drug overdose. And of the 806 people who died, 576 were had a permanent address. So even in permanent housing, if we don't have some way of maintaining safety for people in their housing, they still run the risk of dying from drug overdoses. So you just speak to what others have talked about what are the services supported on the site, at the site, and let's be creative about it. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Vika. And thank you, everyone. This was a really, really good discussion for us. Super helpful to hear your thoughts. And our next step here is to have sort of similar discussions with the council. So we will make sure to summarize the feedback you've given us and provide it to them as part of their information. We will also be sending out a chance to talk through a little bit more of the actions part of the plan. So keep an eye out for that. I know that we would love to, as I mentioned, have more of a conversation about prevention, maybe with a smaller group of folks, and a conversation about health data. So really interested in those pieces. But really, I know, and some of the comments we had actually addressed our next agenda items, so they're all appropriate here. But just want to thank you all so much for your thoughtful just conversation and understanding what we're trying to do here and pushing us forward. So with that, I will move us to the next agenda item. We are going to pull the slides back up. And we're going to talk about housing first. So as I mentioned, right, we see this note slides again. But if you go to display settings in the top bar, yep, and then click swap presenter and slide view, that should work. There you go. So I'm going to talk about this. So we were supposed to talk about this at the last meeting. We ran out of time. We moved it here because we wanted to give it the right amount of time and really let folks talk about it. As some of you may know, CalICH was initially created to oversee the implementation of the Housing First statute and work with state departments and agencies on the council to ensure they had the resources and support they needed for that implementation. So in the past, we've done some work in this area, but with newfound capacity in our organization, we're planning to get much more involved in helping our state and local partners in the implementation of Housing First. And just to say up front, right, our role as CalICH is to understand what the state's law says, provide guidance to state and local partners, and help develop resources so that we can achieve the vision originally intended by the Housing First law. And while we know there are likely opinions in this group and among every group about the law itself, CalICH is not necessarily in a position to change that statute or debate, the merits of the core components included in the statute. But what we're really hoping to do today is hear from you all about, how can CalICH be the most helpful in ensuring effective implementation of Housing First, so that it is successful and leads us to a world in which we can provide housing and services at the levels appropriate for all people experiencing homelessness in California. So we heard a little bit about this in the last conversation. And before we have that discussion, I'm going to let my colleague Giselle Sanchez speak to you all a bit about California's Housing First statute. Then we'll actually hear from your very own committee member, Sharon Rapport, on the origins of Housing First in California and what the vision really is for it. And then those presentations will build to our discussion questions around CalICH's role in implementing Housing First across the state. So with that, I will pass it over to Giselle.
Hello. Move to the next slide, please. Thank you. Hi, I'm Giselle Sanchez, statewide policy specialist here at CalICH. Part of my role is to lead our work around Housing First. Provide a quick overview of CalICH's role in Housing First, starting with some historic context, In 2016, SB 1380 established the definition of housing first and its requirements, including 11 core components for state programs. It also created and required the council to oversee the adoption of the Housing First statute into the guidelines and regulations of state programs. Some changes that occurred in 2021 were HCFC being reformed to Cal-ICH, the application of Housing First being expanded to emergency shelters, and Housing First requirements being established for specific recovery housing programs. Next slide, please. These are the Housing First core components established by statute. It is our goal at Cal-ICH to work with our council agencies and departments to make sure they understand and appropriately adopt these components. I want to emphasize that these components include low barrier access to housing, not having prerequisites or conditions for participants. They also require services to be voluntary and that those services be participant driven and tailored to participants' needs. Next slide, please. In our work to oversee Housing First, we assess our state programs. We assess state programs that they have adopted the core components of Housing First statute in their program guidelines. We plan to survey our state partners this year. We want to try to understand the barriers for state departments and agencies that they face in implementing these requirements to provide and then provide them the resources and guidance to help implement the statute. We also identify challenges at the local level and develop and share resources to support local partners to strengthen Housing First. Next slide, thank you. And lastly, we are planning on expanding our focus on Housing First now that we have more capacity. This may include creating resources for state partners and community level partners. So addressing needs for specific populations experiencing homelessness and uplifting trauma-informed and culturally appropriate practices. Our hope today for today's discussion is for you all to provide us feedback on our role in helping implement Housing First and identify possible areas that Cal-ICH could add value in to make the state's Housing First vision be as successful as possible. Before we get into that, we want to make sure we're on the same page about the vision for Housing First in California and what it would look like to do it successfully. I will pass it to your fellow committee member, Sharon Rapport, to discuss this a bit more before we jump into the discussion. Thank you. Now I'll pass it over to Sharon.
Thanks, Giselle. Hi, everybody. Sharon Rapport, and I'm with Corporation for Supportive Housing. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I work on state policy around solving homelessness in California and have partnered a lot with Cal-ICH staff and did advise Senator Mitchell on SB 1380, which became the Housing First law. Next slide, please. So I think when Housing First was originally created, it really was acknowledging that housing is the foundation for achieving health and recovery goals. And I think Vitka said it really, really well in her last comment about, really of seeing housing as a way to receive treatment services that could be very intensive services to prevent people from having to go into institutional settings and to be able to recover in their own community and independent settings. Next slide. And this was a big change from what housing or homeless response was like in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and even in some jurisdictions now where we really had a housing ready approach. And that prevented a lot of people from ever being able to access permanent housing or housing without limits on length of stay. So there was, kind of a gauntlet that people had to go through in order to get to the permanent housing. If they did not meet all of the challenges or requirements to get into housing, they would remain homeless for long periods or end up institutionalized and go through a cycle of institutional settings and homelessness. And then if they did get into transitional housing, traditional transitional housing, lots of times that housing had rules that would make it really difficult or nearly impossible for people with significant behavioral health conditions to ever make it to the permanent housing stage. So a lot of people falling back into homelessness or never being able to leave homelessness because of that housing ready approach. Next slide, please. The idea with Housing First is that people can access housing as quickly as possible in order for them to be able to work on their recovery and stability, and eventually the goal being housing stability to allow them to reach health stability, stability in their justice system involvement, or if they've had child welfare involvement, stability in that area. So really, again, going back to that first principle that housing is a foundation for being able to address your other health and social needs is critical to the Housing First approach. I do think that in terms of the principles around Housing First, these are often misunderstood. But the idea with Housing First is that it is consumer driven, or tenant driven. So the consumer decides which services they'll receive. It's not voluntary. When we talk about voluntary services, the services aren't voluntary for the provider. They must provide the services. And in fact, the provider is required to engage the tenant or the consumer to form trusting relationships and to build a services plan. And we do see from evidence that when services are voluntary, many more people participate in those services than if they're mandated, or if people will lose their housing as a result of not participating in the services. So the principle behind Housing First is that if people have choice, if they drive their own services plan, that they'll stay in housing longer and achieve housing stability, that they'll be more likely to access treatment and participate in services, and that they will achieve health stability as well. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to clarify some misconceptions out there about what Housing First is and is not. It is not a one-size-fits-all formula. Oh, sorry. I think the slides may be advancing automatically. Sorry about that. So it is intended to be driven by the consumer or tenant. And in that way, it is not one size fits all, because every individual will need a different package of services. It's also not housing only. So in response to the comment before that we need services, I absolutely agree that we are not in California, and this is my comment, not CalICH stuff. We are not providing services at the level that we should be, and California woefully underinvests in services, and we are seeing significant problems in supportive housing right now. And I think it's largely because we're not funding services at the level that we should be, or at the intensity we should be. But that is technically, it's not Housing First if the services aren't part of the housing. Services are a critical component of what the housing should look like. So some of the services models consistent with Housing First, one I'll just mention, assertive community treatment. Again, we don't fund a lot of it in California, but it is an evidence-based model. It's very intensive, multidisciplinary team approach for people with severe behavioral health conditions. It usually includes a psychiatrist, a case manager, outreach worker, peer, and the ratios between the tenant to service provider ratio is really low. It allows for 24/7 access to the case manager, and it's just a very intensive model to assertively engage people, and that could be outreach when they're first, when people are still on the streets, engaging people assertively to build those trusting relationships, and then continuing that intensive level of services for as long as that person needs that intensive level of services. Somebody mentioned Prop 1 earlier. This is some of the focus on Prop 1 is in providing more resources for assertive community treatment. But whatever services model is provided, again, should be largely tenant driven in terms of specific services that the tenant or consumer needs and wants. And then again, high levels of engagement and following the 6 principles of trauma-informed care, because homelessness is a traumatic experience for everyone. So that's a critical component, something that I think we don't fund to be able to do enough of in California. Next slide, please. Another lightning rod around Housing First is harm reduction. So just thought I'd just spend a minute on that. It is seen as core to the Housing First approach. And it simply is that people should choose their own recovery path based on education of ways to reduce the risk. So for people who are engaged in highly risky behavior, that could mean substance use. That person is receiving whatever support and resources they need to be able to reduce that risk. And I think people largely associate harm reduction with like needles and, clean, safe ways to use, but it's also associated with medication-assisted treatment, counseling, or support in reducing the risk of eviction. So maybe counseling the person on when they can use, like they need to be in their own apartment, or what time they can use. And there is like around harm reduction, it's not leaving people alone to do whatever they want in their own apartment. It really is supposed to be highly engaging and really helping that individual achieve their own goals around their use. So it's not just like, well, we'll leave you alone. You want a harm reduction approach. You can stay in your own apartment all day and use if you want. It really is the service provider. The services are key, and the service provider should be engaging with that person and helping them achieve whatever goals they want to achieve around their use. Next slide, please. Some of the tools for harm reduction and services are, these are all evidence-based, as is harm reduction, motivational interviewing, autonomy, and a process of really, again, assertive engagement. Next slide. Housing First is an evidence-based approach, and I don't want to go into like all the details of all the studies, but there are dozens of studies out there around Housing First. And we see from those studies that people are able to exit homelessness at higher rates. They're able to engage in services at higher rates, in treatment at higher rates, and they reduce costs and are able to stay housed longer. Next slide. On the last call, I think somebody had talked about if there were only a tool to like measure whether whether a program is complying with Housing First. There are actually tools out there. So just wanted to bring 2 to your attention. One is a HUD, a Housing First assessment tool. Cal ICH also has a tool that I think is largely based on similar principles. And that just is a tool to like measure a program against the basic components of Housing First. The other one is a Pathways to Housing fidelity scale. And that one basically allows a Housing First provider to score how well their program is doing against Housing First fidelity scale. So both are really helpful if you're looking at your own program. And I think for the state, they'd be helpful for other state agencies to kind of measure how the state agency or department programs are comparing to what Housing First is actually promoting. So I'll stop there and see if anybody has any questions, and look forward to the comment.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon. Really appreciate it. And I'll just pull us to the next slide because it actually has a few discussion questions on it. So really appreciate Giselle and Sharon both going over, right, the sort of history of Housing First and what a successful Housing First looks like, right? And I don't think we're under the auspices that like every iteration of Housing First is working perfectly, et cetera. But wanted to just give us a chance to say like, what is it that we're actually trying to do with this? And really to focus our discussion on saying like, as Cal ICH is increasing its focus on Housing First, what is the best role for us to play in pursuing this vision? What resources or assistance are we best positioned to provide? And sort of, do you see any opportunities as the advisory committee to develop or uplift Housing First best practices, right? So that's sort of our first set of questions. And then as well, like and we might not have time to get into this specifically, like this might be a focus of a future discussion, but what are the barriers to implementing Housing First that the state could help address, right? So really looking to hear from you all, like, where can we be most impactful as Cal ICH getting involved in this work more deeply? So I'll give folks a chance to sort of raise their hand. We'll pull down the slides and share the questions in the chat again as well. But just want to give folks a chance to weigh in on Cal ICH's role in this way. Great, and I see, Margot, I see your hand first here.
I think Charles was first.
Oh, sorry, my screen is reversed, but that's fine. Chuck, do you want to go?
Actually, I think that was a hands up
from before. Okay. First of all, I just wanted to thank Sharon for such an incredibly clear and important presentation. I see a couple things. One is we are seeing enormous pushback on Housing First, which is against all evidence, is extremely dangerous, and reflects a sort of a profound misunderstanding and mischaracterization of what is absolutely 100% settled science on the best practices. So the first thing is, I think that as the state agency responsible for this, we have a role to play to be very clear that this was not like a random choice, that this was a bipartisan, extraordinarily, as a physician who, you know, medical science does everything by evidence, this is about as settled science as you can get. Pushing you back against this, in my mind, is equivalent to pushing back on things like aspirins or statins for heart attacks, which have driven down death rates enormously. Like nobody would think of saying that an aspirin doesn't work to prevent a heart attack. To say that Housing First doesn't work is that level of outrageousness, as someone who is very trained in sort of reading and evaluating science and literature. And I think it's important for us to say that. I think that, however, one of the reasons that it has been open for some sort of, I would say, you know, pushback, which isn't fair, is because it hasn't been implemented well. And I think, as Sharon pointed out really clearly, Housing First has a very clear definition of what makes something Housing First. It is not housing only. It is not a lot of the things that people have mischaracterized it to be. And I think that anything that Cal ICH can do to make sure, for instance, that those supportive resources are there. Because if you don't have those supportive resources, you are not, in fact, doing Housing First. They are voluntary, because what we've shown again and again and again is if you make them there, if you make them culturally appropriate, if you make them low barrier, people do take them up. So they do need to be voluntary. By the way, if they're voluntary and they're there, people use them. So it is the single best way to get people treatment. But we do need to make sure that they're there, that they're funded, that they are evidence-based, that they are non-compulsory. The only thing in the Housing First model that is compulsory is a weekly or monthly, I'm forgetting, housing check. People in the Pathways to Housing model, there is a standard where you need to have a meeting, you know, a check-in, just to make sure that you have, you know, that your housing needs are being met. So I think we just need to make sure that the funding is there for the services, frankly, so we're not abandoning people experiencing homelessness, and we're also frankly not abandoning our housing providers who've sometimes been sort of left, with folks who have high needs and need those services, and those services haven't been there for them. I think we need to make sure that they're evidence-based, and I think we need to make sure that the funding is there and that we're tracking that we're not abandoning either people experiencing homelessness and exiting that experience, or the housers who are serving them. And just that we are pushing back against this, what I think is a very dangerous, on evidence-based pushback against something that's settled science. Thanks.
Thank you, Margot. Appreciate that comment. Vika, is your hand?
Yes, Margot, I appreciate it too, and pretty aware of how strange San Francisco is right now, just in terms of like the 70s all over again somehow in San Francisco. And not the cool
Or the early 80s, perhaps.
or the early 80s. Yeah, it's just very strange. And the real pushback against things like housing first, and wanting to look at models that say you have to earn housing based on certain behaviors. I think is so problematic. We operated for 11 months in San Francisco, ostensibly an overdose prevention site or a supervised consumption site. It gets nothing but terrible, policymakers and the press say is a failure. It was an incredible success because it saved a bunch of lives, and it got a bunch of people who were using drugs outside into a private area to use drugs. And the majority of what people were seeking in that came to us, we got 400 people a day, every single day. We were open 12 hours a day. Majority of what people were seeking when they came to that space was what we offered, which was, let's get you out of the public eye where you feel, which is unsafe and unsanitary, and you don't want to be out there with people staring at you either. So they wanted to be out of the public eye, and they wanted housing. That was it. Like those two main things that they wanted. And so had you given them housing, yes, they would have continued to use drugs. That's true. And so if you embrace a housing first harm reduction model, then you say, okay, if they continue to use drugs, let's figure out what else they now need. How can they do so safely? A lot of people, as I said earlier, a lot of people who are in permanent housing are housed in SROs, and they're using drugs, and they have to use a loan, and they die. And so if your goal is to get people off the street because that's humane and it's just, and it's also better for community and it's better for people's health, then you have to then think, what's the next thing I have to do? In addition to all the conversation around housing first attached to where there's services attached, you have to think about what you need to do to make sure that people don't die. And I think the expectation, even amongst housing first providers, is that this is how we get them into treatment. And maybe that would be great if they go into treatment, and maybe if they start using less drugs, and maybe if they use less dangerous drugs, or maybe if we can get them on alternative medications, opioid agonist treatment programs, that would be awesome. But I think to truly embrace housing first, you have to embrace, what do the people want, and let's see if we can get it for them and keep them safe. And that the fact that they went into treatment or not is not the gold star. It's that they were safely housed and didn't die. That's the gold star. They didn't lose their housing. And then finally, I think the complicating factor are people who have, an Axis 1 diagnosis. They have serious and persistent mental illness, and then it potentially have, problems in thinking. They still, people still have things they want. And I think if we listened, that with that population, again, rather than institutionalizing, I think that is much more of a scalpel rather than a buzzsaw. Do you know what I mean? I mean, I think there's not going to be one big policy that's the fix. The one big policy that's the fix is institutionalizing people. But we've been there. That is not an effective policy. And so we then have to work very discreetly to work with individuals to figure out, how do we keep you safely housed and keep you in some space of stability and safety? And also so that your behaviors don't necessarily become problematic for your neighbors. But those are all things that are real. And I think that we are challenged to figure out what that is by by looking at best practices in other states or countries, and also by just talking to the people who are experiencing those conditions.
Yeah, thank you, Vika. And I just want to say, so I've heard a few things as far as like Cal ICH's role specifically in these two comments, right? I hear like being really clear about what a successful Housing First implementation looks like, providing resources around that. And then Vika, I would think your last point about like, how do we uplift those best practices? How do we share? How do we identify what those barriers are so that we can help overcome them, provide via resources or whatever it is that we have at our disposal, so that we are actually helping to create a successful implementation of Housing First. We would love the advisory committee's help with that. Obviously, we are not going to be able to do that all in this meeting, but just want to put that out there. I see a few more hands, so we're going to take those before we finish up our discussion. Reba?
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, for presentation. You know what, I'm oftentimes reminded of my own personal journey. And I drink and I use drugs. I smoked dope for 21 years while being on. And I think what's important for me to uplift the fact that there were several ways in which were opportunities for me to become sober and to no longer find a desire to use drugs. The piece that's oftentimes missing when I'm in these circles of discussion around even harm reduction or use is that there were situations and circumstances that happened prior to me being introduced to drugs or, you know, becoming actively using and then having this addiction where I need it and not really addressing it. And so I just think that it's really important that we are mindful of the fact that whoever is providing that service on the other end, who is that person? How healthy is that person? How dedicated and committed is that person? Is that person really meeting the individual, or in my case, me, where I am, right? And really helping me and listening to me. I went through treatment facilities and I was begging those people to let me go to the mental health facility because I knew just because I looked a certain way or because I could speak clear did not mean that I did not know that I needed to get some real help. I had became suicidal. And then we have to remember that there's also that shame, that self-shame that we oftentimes carry, or at least I carried, where it was about what you were going to think about me if I went to the mental health facility. And so I really believe that we have to begin, and once we are picking people up and bringing them inside, that the Housing First, some parts of those services need to be incorporated immediately. The other is around structure. I'm just talking about Reba. Reba needed structure. Reba needed rules, regulations, and guidelines because Reba was out of control. And while I was on the street, you know, it was all about survival and, you know, and coming up at the same time. Gotta survive and I gotta come up. And if we're not careful, when people come inside and there is an opportunity, and sometimes it's just a moment, that opportunity is a moment that you may be able to actually get that person the services in which they so rightfully need and deserve. And I don't think that it should just be about what do I want. It's about also having a conversation and you being able to share with me. Because I can't see my need, so I just needed to say that services should begin at the front end and not wait for someone housed all of one side.
Thank you, Reba. I really appreciate that. Doug, I see your hand. Doug Shoemaker.
Thanks, Cody. Cody, I just wanted to pose a few questions maybe for future consideration. So I think Sharon did a great job of describing Housing First. And I think that it may be less a question of whether or not this group has concerns with Housing First as much as what are the other aspects of trying to run permanent supportive housing and a model for helping people exit homelessness that are not about opposition to Housing First as much as it is about what else we need to think about. So first, I would like to ask, what is our understanding of our obligation to permanent supportive housing providers and their staff when we say we offer a supportive housing model that includes substance treatment, mental health treatment, and the like, but we consistently fail to provide those supports, both to the residents and to the staff. What is the responsibility of the state, the provider, the developer, whoever you want to talk about it, to make sure that your staff is held safe from violence in the case of a harm reduction model? Huge issue. I'm not sure how we deal with it, but I'd like to talk about it rather than say we're against housing first or we're for housing first. I partly just want to say what I'm concerned about is how do I make sure that my staff that are working to help people in a housing first model are not the victims of violence? Another question I have is, what do we do about people that would like clean and sober facilities and don't feel like they can succeed in their recovery in a harm reduction space? I hear over and over again from people who would really like an alcohol and drug-free space, and I have no idea how to provide it as a permanent supportive housing provider. I don't know that I'd be permitted to build it. I don't know that I'd be funded to operate it. And yet I hear over and over again from folks that there is a need for alternative spaces. And I'm not sure that we know how to do that in the context of our current approach. It's not an opposition to housing first. It's a question of how do we complement housing first with other models that represent the full range of options that people want. Not everyone wants to be in a harm reduction space. And I'm not sure we've talked about exactly how we do that. And I guess, you know, the really important thing I think for me is like, what is our recommendation to the state in order to make sure that I hear Margot and Vika and everyone and Sharon on the, you know, housing first isn't necessarily about treatment as a success. And yet in the absence of treatment programs, in the absence of sufficient mental health treatment opportunities for residents, we see people languishing in our buildings in ways that they express that they don't want to. They would like to have access to these things. The staff would benefit from those things, and yet they're not scaled at the level that we're producing the housing. And so part of what I want to ask the ICH is, how do we make sure that the state and local governments provide those in proportion to the need as expressed by residents or others? I don't feel like that's happening right now. So it's, to me, I think those are the big questions, not, I understand, Margot, you've got this broader issue that I'm less aware of, that, you know, people are attacking housing first. I hope that's not where I'm coming from. I'm really just trying to understand, we need a full service approach. And I want to just say, like, housing first is just a step, but there's other pieces of the model that I don't think are operating very well. And they're not philosophical, they're pragmatic and practical considerations that relate to money.
Yeah, thank you for that, Doug. And I just want to say to your comment, right, these are the types of conversations we are also interested in having. Obviously, it's not enough time today to do all of that, but I think that what we, at least at CalICH, have thought about housing first, right, envisions all of that, right? Like, it includes a world in which people can say, this is the type of recovery that I'm looking to achieve, like that would be work for me right now, and they actually have access to that, right? So that might be sober living, that might be harm reduction as it is like supervised consumption, right? That could be a whole host of things. And I think for us, that's sort of exactly the conversation we hope to have going forward, is like, how do we provide resources so that folks can actually access the services that they want, including the things that you mentioned. So thank you for bringing that up. And I think we'll find more space to discuss this further, because it seems like there's a lot of good conversation to happen. I see someone posted in the chat that it is a great and healthy discussion, which I agree with. So the last hand up I see is Ludmilla's. Ludmilla, you want to take us home and then we'll finish up here?
Okay, I did see one person after me too, but anyways, I do want to say that thank you so much, Sharon, for the really excellent presentation on this. And I did bring a lot of clarity. On one of the earlier slides, it says that the model for housing first is you go from homelessness into housing first. That's not what's happening out in the world. What's happening is you go from homelessness, and if you can connect with somebody, you get put on a waiting list. You don't go into housing, you go into a waiting list. And that waiting list is some place where you can end up for indefinite periods of time. Like the majority of people go onto a waiting list and you get cycled around, okay, with needing this, needing to check in, lack of clarity on who to check in with, just all kinds of stuff. And that's where the problem is in the system, is that it breakdowns at that point because you're not entered into housing, you're entered onto a waiting list. Okay. It would be great, instead of going onto just a waiting list, if you are given a list of shared with, given a warm handoff to voluntary different options. Is there a parking lot I can go to that I can park my vehicle on? Is there a drop-in center that I can go? Are there places that I am welcome to go to? I think one of the things that would be most helpful for us is to have a recommended list of yes places that will say yes to people who are homeless coming in, that 211 local 211s could have posted in their that people call in, and and you have a list of places. Yes, you can go here. Yes, you can go there, including a 24/7 warm line that we can check in on. Another really big helpful thing is getting a social worker. This is one of the biggest mysteries. How do you get a social worker who's actually not just a situational or part-time, but how? I never did find out how to get a social worker. I never did have one. A big question out in the field is, at what point in the process do you get assigned a social worker? We don't know. Maybe you get a social worker after you've gotten into housing, but I'm going to say the point when we need somebody to connect with is actually even more so before we're housed. Okay, this is not a substitute for housing. It's like, who can I talk to that's a real person that can help me navigate the system? Not just an outreach worker, who's trying to get me into a placement someplace, but a social worker. I found too many times that there's no help if we're not housed. I'll reach out for help and it's like, oh, well, we can't help you because you're not in our program yet. Okay, don't know how many other people out there are running into that. But thank you so much. Those two are my suggestions. Thank you for the time.
Thanks, Lubna, as always, really appreciate it. Okay, I know we are over time. I appreciate folks hanging on. I didn't want to interrupt any of our conversations because they were both really helpful for us. And I think there might be more questions now that we want to go back to you all with, but I think that's often the result of a good discussion. So just thank you all for your strong participation and your thoughtfulness here. So I'm going to pass it to Claire to take us on to our last agenda item, which is general public comment, and then we will close the meeting.
All right, thanks everyone. So we will now accept general public comments. Thank you all for your patience, and I appreciate all of the committee members who are left for listening to the public comments as well. We welcome all comments and feedback. I would like to remind everyone that we are unable to discuss items that were not on the agenda for today's meeting, and due to the structure of this public meeting, we will not be able to respond to any questions. If you have questions for Cal ICH or the committee, the best way for you to ask or respond to us is via email at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. Everyone will get 2 minutes for their comment. A Cal ICH staff member will soon share a 2-minute countdown timer on the screen. And I will warn you when your time has expired. So if you are connected through Zoom, you can select the raised hand icon in the meeting window on your computer, and I will unmute you and allow your audio. For those joining us by telephone, you may press *9 to indicate that you would like to comment, and once I call on you to speak, you will be instructed to press *6 to unmute yourself. Okay, so I will check for any raised hands. Okay. We have 2 raised hands currently. Giselle, perfect. So Alice Lynn, you are first, and I'm going to allow you to talk. Alice, go ahead.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Alice Lynn.
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for allowing public comment and for considering the Housing First topics. It's a wonderful presentation by Sharon. And I'm a supporter of Housing First. I should say I'm in Sonoma County along with Ludmilla. And I have lived experience of homelessness from 2012 to 2016. And now I serve on our local lived experience advisory and planning board. And regarding Housing First, I support it. I believe housing is healthcare. And I'm concerned about messaging. I support Housing First, but I'm concerned that the term Housing First is sometimes getting confused when, say, our local board is deliberating or our board of supervisors is deliberating whether to fund more shelter beds or more units of permanent housing. And that people are thinking Housing First is referring to prioritizing creating more permanent housing versus shelter. And I'm concerned about this because, of course, there are so many people outside who don't have a shelter bed to go into, who are being traumatized and dying. And I'm passionate about focusing on constructing more or creating more shelter beds for people's immediate survival needs. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts on messaging that makes that clear that Housing First is about behavioral health, not about permanent housing creation versus shelter, two separate issues. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks, Alice. Appreciate your comments. Okay. Next is Gregory Fearon. I'm going to allow you to talk. Go ahead and voice your comment.
Thank you very much. I've just been so impressed with this conversation, with the presentations and the questions and comments by all of the members. I'm so impressed that I want to emphasize that you should get this recording out as fast as possible, because there's a bunch of people who I want to listen to this. So that's my request. And I know you did it pretty fast last time, but get it even faster. Thank you.
Thank you. I will do my absolute best. Okay, thank you very much. And then the next individual is a phone number. So if you're comfortable, please state your name for the record, and I will be allowing you to talk. The phone number is 1561.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, cool. Thank you. Hi, I'm Ruth. I'm unhoused. I live outside. I'm under a tarp right now in my little tiny house structure. It was really, really windy yesterday, but like we had a friend that does outreach came over and helped us tie our tarp down so we didn't fly away. And now it's just been raining. It's really, really wet. Like I'm pretty dry under my tarp, but I'm worried about some people because like my friend, okay, so like I was targeted by a encampment resolution fund last year around June. And I never got in the hotel, but my partner got in the hotel, but they got kicked out. But this other person that didn't get kicked out got transferred to an interim shelter motel that's not funded by the encampment resolution fund. I think it's like a city funded interim. It used to be a home key, right? So now it's just like an interim shelter. And so they're staying there, but then they texted me that somebody was getting kicked out, like it immediately terminated with no notice. And I was freaking out because I was like, they can't do that because it's illegal. Like they're supposed to get 30 days written notice unless they did like a legitimate crime, you know? And that wasn't the case. And then I called to try to advocate for this person, and like I said, you know, it's gonna rain really bad. Like, this person doesn't have a tent or anything. Like, are you sure you can't just like forgive this person for whatever happened? And they said, no, like, we're not gonna let them back here. So I just want to let people know that that's what's going on, that people are getting kicked out permanently, and then there's no way back in, right? There's no like door to like walk through again once that happens, you know, and there's no grievance process. And like in Los Angeles, there's not even a lived experience board. There was this council file CF 19-1020 bought by Mike Bonin and Marquise Hurst Dawson in like 2019. And it's going to expire this year if no action is taken. So we don't have any way to raise our grievances other than like calling here.
Thank you, Ruth, for your comment, and I appreciate you sharing your experience. Can
I please give you my email?
As we've discussed before, you can email, and I encourage you to email calich@bcsh.ca.gov. And that will go to our inbox that we have a staff check regularly, okay?
Okay, can I say my email in case anyone wants to email me?
I wouldn't advise that over a public forum.
Oh, I understand, but I would like to, like, I like what some of the people had to say in this meeting, and if they wanted to email me, I would like to speak to someone, because I did this last month too, a different situation with a different person, and I'm just really trying to get these problems fixed, like.
Sure. How about you share, how about you email us at calich@bcsh.ca.gov with your email address, and then we can share it with the advisory committee members so that you're not sharing it on a public forum.
I'm okay with sharing it publicly. It's Roofless Ruth, ROOFLESS Ruth, RUTH@gmail.
Okay. Thanks, Ruth. All right, and the next individual for public comment is Teddy Pierce. I'm going to be allowing you to speak.
Thank you, everybody. I'm really intrigued by the Housing First conversation, mainly because I don't like the black and white part of what that presents either, but I do agree that implementation has been very difficult. I know, like, I work with quite a few of the rural counties, and you know, when the welfare code came down in the contracts, some people didn't even notice it was there. What we did at one of the COCs was to pull in one of the East Bay Housing First providers and do like a learning session for about an hour and a half where anyone could ask any question that they like. I would think that Cal ICH could also create some kind of a toolkit to help seed conversations at the staff level to see if people feel like they're doing, you know, Housing First, if they really truly understand it. What are some of the exceptions? What would they do in that case? You know, and I'll just say too that all the work we do is framed by very strict legislation. So it's kind of hard to just have it be put out there in the ether and say, you know, here's the philosophy when people don't, you know, they need people to ask questions. What do you do when this happens? So I would just highly recommend that Cal ICH create some kind of toolkits, talking circles, learning circles, get those out to the COC so people can have their own conversations, hear about use cases, business cases, case studies, things like that. I think it's a lot in the learning and the implementation. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Teddy. And I have no other hands raised. So I want to thank everyone and the advisory committee members and the members of the public for your comments and your engagement. And I will turn it back over to Cody Ziegler for final remarks.
So much, Claire. Thank you to all of the folks who provided public comment. You know, we welcome all comments and feedback and really encourage you to email us at our email address if you need any resources or if you have any questions for us. So we'll show that again on the next slide. But thanks to all of our committee members for your insights and comments during our meeting today. You know, as you can see, we're working hard to move the committee toward actionable work and are only able to do so because of your thoughtful input and attention to this. So our next committee meeting will be on May 21st, 2024 at 1 p.m. And we hope you all listen into our council meeting on February 28th. at 1 p.m. at the end of this month. And with that, this meeting is adjourned at 3:23 p.m. So to receive up-to-date information on the council's activities, please sign up on council's email list, which is listed on this slide. You can email us with questions or if you need any resources at calich@bcsh.ca.gov. And you can follow us on social media platforms listed here. So thank you all for being here and we will speak soon.